of Sabbaths about the story of Jesus. We don't have like a big Christmas program to put on. Was it 3 years ago that you guys did? 3 years ago? 2 or 3 years ago, maybe 2. That Jesse and Brenda wrote a Christmas program in conjunction with our choir. Remember our choir? It was amazing. Well, we don't have that this year. But what I thought we would do is we would take an opportunity to look at the story of Jesus from different perspectives throughout the month. If I sit here, you guys can't see this, can you? I know what I want to do. Let me read a story first, and we're going to watch a video, and then we're going to do something else. So I want to read the story out of the Bible of Jesus, starting in Luke. It's not a long story, but it's the most important one. And there we go. Luke chapter 2. At that time, the Roman Emperor Augustus decreed that a census should be taken throughout the Roman Empire. This was the first census taken when Quirinius was governor of Syria. All returned to their own ancestral towns to register for this census, and because Joseph was a descendant of King David, he had to go to Bethlehem in Judea, David's ancient home. He traveled there from the village of Nazareth in Galilee. He took with him Mary, his fiancée, who was now obviously pregnant. And while they were there, the time came for her baby to be born. She gave birth to her first child, a son. She wrapped him snugly in strips of cloth and laid him in a manger because there was no lodging available for them. That night there were shepherds staying in the fields nearby, guarding their flocks of sheep. Suddenly, an angel of the Lord appeared among them, and the radiance of the Lord's glory surrounded them. They were terrified, but the angel reassured them. "Don't be afraid," he said. "I bring you good news that will bring great joy to all people. The Savior, yes, the Messiah, the Lord, has been born today in Bethlehem, the city of David. And you will recognize him by this sign. You will find a baby wrapped snugly in strips of cloth lying in a manger." Suddenly the angel was joined by a vast host of others, the armies of heaven, praising God and saying, "Glory to God in the highest, and peace on earth to those with whom God is pleased." When the angels had returned to heaven, the shepherds said to each other, "Let's go to Bethlehem. Let's see this thing that has happened, which the Lord has told us about." They hurried to the village and found Mary and Joseph, and there was the baby lying in the manger. After seeing him, the shepherds told everyone what had happened and what the angel had said to them about the child. All who heard the shepherd's story were astonished. But Mary kept all these things in her heart and thought about them often. The shepherds went back to their flocks, glorifying and praising God for all they had heard and seen. It was just as the angel had told them. Yes, Cassidy. Potluck will not be today. I am so sorry, but we'll have it for you one of these days. There is, are any of you aware of the compilation called In a Manger by Max Lucado? Max Lucado has written many, many books, and there's a compilation that's been put together from many of his books to have this story in an unusual, in a different way. And I was very moved by this book. I actually didn't have it. I got it on my Kindle yesterday and was quite moved by, I appreciate how Max Lucado writes. Anybody like how Max Lucado writes and thinks and how he presents Jesus? It's very, very Christ-centered, very gospel-centered. So I want to share some of this, and we're going to look at pieces of this as we go. I'm glad that Jesus came and showed us that it's all right to have a crummy beginning. It's all right to have the experiences that we've had because he knows what they're like. A small cathedral outside Bethlehem marks the supposed birthplace of Jesus. Behind a high altar in the church is a cave, a little cavern lit by silver lamps. You can enter the main edifice and admire the ancient church. You can also enter the quiet cave, where a star embedded in the floor recognizes the birth of the king. There is one stipulation, however. You must stoop. You have to stoop. The door is so low you can't go in standing up. The same is true of Christ. You can see the world standing tall, but to witness the Savior, you have to get on your knees. So at the birth of Jesus, while the theologians were sleeping, and the elite were dreaming, and the successful were snoring, the meek were kneeling. They were kneeling before the one and only, the one only meek will see. They were kneeling in front of Jesus. Seated at the great desk, the author opens the large book. It has no words because no words exist. No words exist because no words are needed. There are no ears to hear them, no eyes to read them. The author is alone. And so he takes the great pen and begins to write. Like an artist gathers his colors and a woodcarver his tools, the author assembles his words. There are three single words. Out of these three will pour 1,000,000 thoughts. But on these three words, the story will suspend. He takes his quill and spells the first, T-I-M-E. Time did not exist until he wrote it. He himself is timeless, but his story would be encased in time. The story would have a first rising of the sun, a first shifting of the sand, a beginning and an end, a final chapter. He knows it before he writes it. Time, a footspan on eternity's trail. Slowly, tenderly, the author writes the second word, a name, A-D-A-M. As he writes, he sees him, the first Adam. Then he sees all the others. In 1,000 eras, in 1,000 lands, the author sees them. Each Adam, each child, instantly loved, permanently loved. To each he assigns a time and appoints a place. No accidents, no coincidences, just design. The author makes a promise to these unborn. In my image, I will make you. You will be like me. You will laugh. You will create. You will never die. And you will write. They must. For each life is a book, not to be read, but rather a story to be written. The author starts each life story, but each life will write his or her own ending. What a dangerous liberty. How much safer it would have been to finish the story for each Adam, to script every option. It would have been simpler and safer. But it would not have been love. Love is only love if chosen. So the author decides to give each child a pen. Write carefully, he writes. Lovingly, deliberately, he writes a third word. Already feeling the pain. I-M-M-A-N-U-E-L. The greatest mind in the universe imagined time. The truest judge granted Adam a choice, but it was love that gave Emmanuel, God with us. The author would enter his own story. The Word would become flesh. He too would be born. He too would be human. He too would have feet and hands, tears and flesh. And most importantly, he too would have a choice. Emmanuel would stand at the crossroads of life and death and make a choice. The author knows well the weight of the decision. He pauses as he writes the pages of his own pain. He could stop. Even the author has a choice. But how can love not love? So he chooses life, though it means death, with hope that his children will do the same. And so the author of life completes the story. He drives the spike in the flesh and rolls the stone over the grave, knowing the choice he will make, knowing the choice all Adams will make. He pens the end. Then he closes the book and proclaims the beginning. Let there be light. Why would he come? Why Why did Jesus travel so far? I was asking myself that question when I spotted the squirrels outside my window. A family of black-tailed squirrels had made its home amid the roots of the trees north of my office. They watched me peck the keyboard. I watched them store their nuts and climb the trunk. We're mutually amused. But I've never considered becoming one of them. The squirrel world holds no appeal to me. Give up the Rocky Mountains, bass fishing, weddings, and laughter for a hole in the ground and dirty nuts? Count me out. But count Jesus in. What a world he left. Our classiest mansion would be a tree trunk to him. Earth's finest cuisine would be walnuts on heaven's table, and the idea of becoming a squirrel with claws and a furry tail, it's nothing compared to God becoming a one-celled embryo and entering the womb of Mary. But he did. The God of the universe was born into the poverty of a peasant and spent his first night in the cow's feed trough. The God of the universe left the glory of heaven and moved into our neighborhood. Who would have imagined he would do such a thing? Why? He loves to be with the ones he loves. Dr. Maxwell Maltz tells the remarkable story of a love like this. Listen to this story, you guys. A man was burned and disfigured in a fire while attempting to save his parents from a burning house, but he couldn't get to them. They perished. He mistakenly interpreted his pain as God's punishment. The man would not let anyone see him, not even his wife. She went to Dr. Maltz, a plastic surgeon, for help. He told her not to worry. I can restore his face. The wife was unenthused. Her husband had repeatedly refused help. She knew he would again. Then why her visit? I want you to disfigure my face so I can be like him. If I can share his pain, maybe he'll let me back in his life. Dr. Maltz was shocked. He denied her request, but was so moved by her love that he went to speak with her husband. Knocking on the man's bedroom door, he called loudly, "I'm a plastic surgeon and I can restore your face." No response. "Please come out." Again, there was no answer. Still speaking through the door, Dr. Maltz told the man of his wife's proposal. "She wants me to disfigure her face to make her face like yours in the hope that you let her back in your life. That's how much she loves you." There was a brief moment of silence, and then ever so slowly, the doorknob began to turn. The way the woman felt for her husband is the way God feels about us. But he did more than make the offer. He took on our face, our disfigurement. He became like us. Just look at the places he was willing to go. Feed troughs, carpentry shops, badlands, and cemeteries. The places he went to reach us show how far he will go to touch us. He loves to be with the ones he loves. Just call him Jesus. It was about to begin, God's plan for humanity, crafted in the halls of heaven, carried out on the plains of earth. Only holiness could have imagined it. Only divinity could have enacted it. Only righteousness could have endured it. And once the plan began, there would be no turning back. The Creator knew it. The Son knew it. And soon, earth itself would witness heaven's majesty alighting on the planet. When God chose to reveal himself to mankind, what medium did he use? A book? No, that was secondary. A church? No, that was consequential. A moral code? No. To limit God's revelation to a cold list of do's and don'ts is as tragic as looking at a Colorado road map and saying you'd seen the Rockies. When God chose to reveal himself, he did so through a human body. The hand that touched the leper had dirt under its nails. The feet upon which the woman wept were calloused and dirty. And his tears, oh, don't miss the tears. They came from a heart as broken as yours or mine has ever been. So people came to him. How they came to him. They came at night. They touched him as he walked down the street. They followed him around the sea. They invited him into their homes and placed their children at his feet. Why? because he refused to be a statue in a cathedral or a priest on an elevated pulpit. He chose instead to be Jesus. There was not a hint of one person who was afraid to draw near him. There were those who mocked him, were envious of him, and misunderstood him. There were those who revered him, but no one considered him too holy or too divine to touch. There was not one person who was reluctant to approach him for fear of being rejected. Remember that the next time you find yourself amazed at your own failures. Remember that the next time acidic accusations burn holes in your soul, or the next time you see a cold cathedral, or a lifeless liturgy. Remember, it is man who creates the distance. It is Jesus who builds the bridge. God came near. It all happened in a moment, a most remarkable moment. As moments go, that one appeared no different than any other. It came and it went. It was one of the countless moments that have marked time since eternity became measurable. But in reality, that particular moment was like none other. For through that segment of time, a spectacular thing occurred. God became a man. While the creatures of earth walked unaware, divinity arrived. Heaven opened herself and placed her most precious one in a human womb. The omnipotent, in one instant, made himself breakable. He who had been spirit became pierceable. He who was larger than the universe became an embryo. And he who sustains the world with a word chose to be dependent upon the nourishment of a young girl. Does that blow your mind? God as a fetus? Holiness sleeping in a womb? The creator of life being created? God was given eyebrows, elbows, 2 kidneys, and a spleen. He stretched against the walls, floated in the amniotic fluid of his mother. God came near. He came not as a flash of light or as an approachable conqueror, but as one whose first cries were heard by a peasant girl and a sleepy carpenter. The hands that first held him were unmanicured, calloused, and dirty. No silk, no ivory, no hype, no party, no hoopla. Were it not for the shepherds, there would have been no reception. And were it not for a group of stargazer, there would have been no gifts. Angels watched as Mary changed God's diaper. Children played in the street with him. He may have had pimples and been tone deaf. Perhaps a girl down the street had a crush on him, or vice versa. One thing's for sure, he was, while completely divine, completely human. For 33 years, he would feel everything you and I have ever felt. He felt weak. He grew weary. He was afraid of failure. He was susceptible to wooing women. He got colds, burped, and had body odor. His feelings got hurt, and his head ached. To think of Jesus in such a light seems almost irreverent, doesn't it? It's uncomfortable. It's much easier to keep the humanity out of the incarnation. There's something about keeping him divine that keeps him distant, packaged, predictable. But don't do it. For heaven's sake, don't. Let him be as human as he intended to be. Let him into the mire and muck of our world, for only if we let him in can he pull us out. It all happened in one moment, a most remarkable moment. The Word became flesh. There will be another. The world will see an instantaneous transformation. You see, in becoming man, God made it possible for man to see God. When Jesus went home, he left the back door open. Did you hear that? When Jesus went home, he left the back door open. And as a result, we will all be changed in a flash, in the twinkling of an eye. The first moment of transformation went unnoticed by the world, but you can bet your sweet September the second won't. The next time you use the phrase, just a moment, remember that's all the time it will take to change this world. Because with God, nothing is impossible. One more. Two more. Gabriel must have scratched his head. See, I can't speak like Mexicator, right? So I wanted you to hear this. Gabriel must have scratched his head at this one. He wasn't one to question his God-given missions. Sending fire and dividing seas were all in an eternity's work for this angel. When God sent, Gabriel went. And when word got out that God was to become a man, Gabriel was enthused. He could envision the moment, the Messiah in a blazing chariot, the king descending on a fiery cloud, an explosion of light from which the Messiah would emerge. That's what he expected. What he never expected, however, was a slip of paper with a Nazarene address. God will become a baby, it read. Tell the mother to name the child Jesus and tell her not to be afraid. Gabriel was never one to question, but this time he had to wonder, God will become a baby? Gabriel remembered what baby Moses looked like. That's okay for humans, but God? The heavens can't contain him. How could a body? Besides, have you seen what comes out of those babies? Hardly befitting for the creator of the universe. To imagine a mother burping God on her shoulder, why, that was beyond what even an angel could imagine. And what of this name, Jesus? Such a common name. There was a Jesus in every cul-de-sac. Come on. Even Gabriel had more punch to it than Jesus. Call the baby Eminence or Majesty or Heaven Sent. Anything but Jesus. So Gabriel scratched his head, but he had his orders. Take the message to Mary. Must be a special girl, he assumed as he traveled. But one peek told him Mary was no queen. The mother-to-be of God was not regal. She was a Jewish peasant who'd barely outgrown her acne and had a crush on a guy named Joe. And speaking of Joe, what does this fellow know? He's a carpenter. Look at him over there, sawdust in his beard, nail apron around his waist. You're telling me God is going to have dinner every night with a common laborer and call this guy Dad? It was all Gabriel could do to keep from turning back. This is a peculiar idea you have, God, he must have muttered to himself. And only heaven knows how long Gabriel fluttered unseen above Mary before he took a breath and broke the news. But he did. He told her the name, the plan, and not to be afraid. And when he announced, with God nothing is impossible, he said it as much for himself as he did for her. For even though he couldn't answer the questions, he knew who could, and that was enough. And even though we can't answer them all, taking time to ask a few could be a good start. Hang on. I have to go to the end. Almost. What love does. Would you do what Jesus did? He swapped a spotless castle for a grimy stable. He exchanged the worship of angels for the company of killers. He nursed from her breast and was clothed in a diaper. If you were God, would you? I wouldn't, but Christ did. If you knew that those you loved would laugh in your face, would you still care? If you knew that the tongues you made would mock you, the mouths would spit at you, the hands you made would crucify you, would you still make them? Jesus did. He humbled himself. He went from commanding angels to sleeping in the straw, from holding stars to clutching Mary's finger. Why? Because that's what love does. It puts the beloved before itself. Your soul was more important than his blood. Your eternal life was more important than his earthly life. Your place in heaven was more important to him than his place in heaven. So he gave up his so you could have yours. He loves you that much. And because he loves you, you are the prime importance to him. Love goes the distance. And Christ traveled from limitless eternities to be confined by time in order to become one of us. He didn't have to. Any step along the way, he could have called it quits. When he saw the size of the womb, he could have stopped. When he saw how tiny his hand would be, how soft his voice would be, how hungry his tummy would be, he could have stopped. The first time he scraped his knee or tasted burnt bagels, he could have walked out. When he saw the dirt floor of his Nazareth house, when Joseph gave him a chore to do, when his fellow students were dozing off during the reading of the Torah, his Torah. At any point, Jesus could have said, "That's enough, I'm going home." But he didn't. He didn't because he is love. Think about that for a minute. Drink deeply from that for a moment. Don't just sip or nip. It's time to gulp. It's time to let his love cover all things in your life, all secrets, all hurts, all hours of evil, minutes of worry. His love will cover all of that. Every promise broken, drug taken, penny stolen. Every cross word, cuss word, and harsh word. His love covers all things. Let it. Discover, along with the psalmist, he loads me with love and mercy. Picture a giant dump truck. Listen to this, kids. Ready? Picture you boys will really get this. Cassidy, listen for a minute. Listen. A giant dump truck full of love. There you are behind it. God lifts the bed until the love starts to slide, slowly at first, then down, 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 until you are hidden, buried, covered in his love.
I did it!
Do it for his sake, for the peace of your heart, and do it for their sake, for the people in your life. Let his love fall on you so yours can fall on them.